So we'll go ahead and kick things off. Welcome to Workshop Wednesdays. My name is Megan. I'm the marketing manager here at Monolith Forensics. If you haven't been to Workshop Wednesdays before, basically what we do is every 2 weeks, live on Wednesday, we do a practical presentation about a digital forensics topic. Usually our founder, Matt Danner, is the one who does it. Occasionally, like today, we have awesome guest presenters come in and kind of talk about interesting things that they're doing in the space. So just some quick housekeeping. We do have time for Q&A. We like to keep the Q&A a little more conversational. So if you have a question during the presentation, go ahead and click the raise hand button. If you would like to ask your question over microphone, and I'll give you permission to talk, and you can ask your question live. Otherwise, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll get to them kind of as we see them. So that's all for my spiel for now. I'm going to hand things over to Matt and our guest, Charlie.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this week. I appreciate it. And I'm just going to do a quick intro for Charlie here, and then I'll let him take over. But anybody that's new here that's not familiar with us or our company, like Megan said, my name is Matt Danner. I'm the CEO of Monolith Forensics. We run these webinars every 2 weeks. Hey, Clemens, thanks for hopping in. So basically, Monolith Forensics, we're a software company. We make one commercial product called Monolith. It's a lab case evidence management system for digital forensics teams. So if you're in law enforcement, you're private sector, e-discovery, cybersecurity, traditional digital forensics, if you're using spreadsheets or using sort of a project management system that you don't like already, go to the website, check it out, reach out to us. We're happy to give you a trial, get you set up with a demo, and we'll see if it's something that you'd want to use. So to get started here with Charlie, just a quick intro. I've known Mr. Rubisoff here for, I don't know, since like 2013 or something. We met a long time ago when Charlie decided to grace Texas with his presence for a short period, and we ended up working together for a bit and kind of formed a little bit of a friendship during that time. And since then, we've kind of gone our separate ways, but we've maintained a solid sort of friendship and professional, acquaintanceship for the last decade plus. So, but he is not a good self-promoter. Most of you guys have probably seen him or heard him or had the pleasure of being at one of his trainings or presentations. But Charlie's by far one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. So you'll do well to really pay attention, listen to the stuff that he has to say, and hopefully you guys can learn as much from him as I have over the years. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him take over. And again, thanks everybody for joining. And we'll have Q&A at the end. So feel free to get your questions loaded and ready to fire at the end of the session. And Charlie will be happy to answer those for you. All right. Thanks, Charlie. And I'll let you take over.
All right. Thanks, Matt. And thank you to Monolith for having me this morning. So we are here today to talk about biomes. And I'm just kind of curious if I can maybe just throw it up in the chat, who here is currently working with biomes? Clemens has got all the time. That's what I want to see. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And yeah, this is an artifact that has been around for a minute, right? I mean, I think most of you guys probably have heard about biomes for a while. We've seen these things popping up on iOS since iOS 15. We've probably heard that it's kind of the replacement for some older artifacts like Knowledge C, Interaction C. And one of the things I really like about biomes, since I've started kind of poking around in there, is this is a living artifact. This is something that is changing regularly from iOS release to release. And sometimes there's even hardware considerations for what kind of data we're going to see in there. So that's our plan for today. We're going to have a very brief, probably too brief of a conversation for the time we have available to talk about biomes, what they are, where we can find them, why they matter, and if they matter, why we want to try to go ahead and read this very valuable artifact. So let's jump into it. What are SEGB biome files? Well, biome is basically an ecosystem, which, the name kind of helps us to understand, where Apple is trying to understand what is the user doing, what is the relationship between the user and their device. And to the extent possible, like, hey, is there any way that maybe our devices can work better for us as users? So essentially what the biome is trying to do is to study our behaviors on our devices. And when we talk about devices, that means both Mac OS and iOS devices. And it's taking notes of what we're doing. So, like in my mind, a lot of what Biome includes is a little guy sitting on my shoulder while I'm on my phone. And he's just taking brief messages as I am performing actions on my device. That's that's pretty cool as a user because we can quickly think about how that might inform a better user experience. If the phone can anticipate what we may do based on past activities, that's a really smooth, dare I say, even like relationship that we have with our device. So that's the intent of why Apple has Biome data. It is trying to increase the user experience and learn more about the users. Now, if we take that a step further and we maybe go into an investigative mindset, we have a little guy on our shoulder that's taking notes as we are interacting with our devices, and it's keeping track with a lot of activities that we're performing. Well, that's where the investigative value really comes into play, and maybe it's a little bit creepy too. I'm pretty sure by the end of this presentation, you guys are going to be a little creeped out with the amount of data that will be available within these artifacts. So we've got an idea of like the why. Why do we see biome data? It's because Apple is trying to learn about the user, and then that is going to improve the user experience on our individual handsets. So where can we find these things? Well, on iOS, which is basically what we're going to focus on today when it comes to biome data, we're going to see two primary locations where we can find these artifacts. You'll notice that both of the locations we see here on screen start with private var. That is indicative of a full file system extraction being necessary to get access to this data. We do not see biome information provided in an iTunes backup. I've seen kind of mixed results when it comes to partial file system extractions. And we are also only going to be able to recover this data in an AFU state. So if you are getting a partial extraction and or a BFU extraction, you're not going to find biome data available with those extraction types. So that's where we can find it. What is that actually kind of looking like when we get inside of there, and what is it keeping track of? So we are tracking specific categories of user data within biomes. Now, if we wanted to go out, grab some documentation from Apple, try to learn more about this artifact, we're going to have a tough time doing that. So I know some of you I see on the list, I know you guys to be Apple developers. You do have access to some additional information that the general public may have a hard time getting hold of, but we're not going to see anything about this proprietary activity that we see within biomes. And that means that pretty much everything we're going to talk about today has been based on research. And I'll tell you right now, much more research is going to be necessary in this area to ensure that if we're going to present this as evidence, that our assertions and our conclusions are going to be sound and based on fact. So again, that's kind of an exciting thing about this artifact. It's new. We're still trying to explore what is going on here. But pretty shortly, you guys are going to see some of the challenges associated with making sense of some of the data we're going to find. So we will see data being provided to biomes from across basically the entire device. So we're going to see things like Siri interactions, keyboard activities, browser activities, messaging, backlight, button pushes, you name it, all the stuff that we are probably interested in as far as like a deep dive, really granular examination. Biome data is excellent for that. What we are going to end up with from the resulting logs that Biomes creates from the notes being generated by the little guy on our shoulder are going to be essentially temporal or time-based logs. And if we look at it in that way, it's pretty straightforward. Hey, here's a timestamp and here's a record related to this activity. and we go from there. So kind of bouncing back just a little bit in the chat, can anybody tell me, since we're going to be talking about SEGB files, what does SEGB stand for? Like that's kind of the common name we've provided for these biome log files. Who can give me what the correct meaning of SEGB is? Yeah, I'm going to let you guys languish in the chat. I don't see anybody jumping in. That's great. We don't know. We don't know. I mean, I've heard all kinds of different speculation of, maybe it's segmented binary files, segmented biome files, but there's no documentation out there to even tell us that. Yeah, that's correct. We do see the phrase or the file signature of SEGB within the file header, and that's where we've kind of settled on, well, let's call them SEGB files based solely on that file signature. Awesome. So what we're going to be able to usually glean from activities that are being recorded by the biome are going to be things like app usage events, changes with the device state, like, hey, the device was on a charger at this date at this time. And oftentimes we can even develop like the duration, or it was connected to a particular external device, like perhaps CarPlay or a Bluetooth device. We're going to see a lot of physical interaction information available. And one of the things too, like that has been kind of my most recent research process with the biomes has been, we're seeing iOS is now including like summarized, processed results from all of this raw SEGB data that's now being stored within SQLite databases. So it's even doing some of the work for us. But yeah, the biggest things we just want to remember is that essentially everything here is time-based. We will see that there are going to be basically lifespans assigned for this data, and that's baked right into the format that we see for Biome, where we may see there's an expiration date for this information after 28 days, which is pretty typical and also strongly indicative of your best data is probably going to have occurred within the last month of your iOS extraction. When we are talking about looking at these SEGB files themselves, they do have a uniform structure. We are going to kind of lightly jump over this because we could spend a lot of time as to talking about how this is designed and how we're going to be able to manually parse this information. But for the webinar today, the main thing we just need to know is that there is uniformity to the way these SEGB files operate. You may have seen SEGB files. Let me see if I can pull one up for us real quick, just so we'll have a point of reference while we're talking. But when we are looking at these SEGB files, we're usually seeing something like this. So I have opened up a folder from a full file system extraction under one of those file paths that we saw just a moment ago. And the data category, the biome information that we're looking at right here is for app.infocus. And this particular biome information tracks what application is open and active on the device screen at a given time. And if we look through here, we see we've got a few different folders. We've got a couple of files. We have a lock file, which is part of the reason that BFU process is not going to work well for us. This information is going to need to go through that unlock process we see taking place with AFU. We're going to have a metadata file. Metadata file may include important information like, hey, here's the duration or the lifespan that we're going to see for our SEGB files. But what I want to do right now is just open up this local directory. And I want to draw your attention right here to some of the SEGB files. Now, as we take a look at this, those of you that are routinely doing iOS or macOS deep dive forensics, you might recognize these file names that we see here for the SEGB files. And if not, then what we see is a series of numbers with no file extension. And this is going to be what we'll see as SEGB files. Can anybody tell me what each one of these file names represents? Nice job, Catherine. So in the chat, Catherine is telling me that this is a timestamp. Absolutely right. So we are going to see each one of these log files represented here with the file name that is a Mac epoch timestamp. And that is representing the initial point in time that this log is going to initiate. So these timestamps are going to coincide with the first record within this timestamp. So if we wanted to, we could just take a quick look and get an idea. Well, here are some of the time spans being covered for the log files we see available. Opening this first SEGB file, we are going to see our file signature. And just like we talked about earlier, this is why we call them SEGB files. And what we see here is basically a little bit of header information. It includes things like a timestamp. It's also going to tell us information about, hey, where is our data payload within this log file actually going to go ahead and start? So what we're going to do is we're going to travel down just a little bit, and we're going to locate the start of this app in focus data. So as we move to the beginning of this data, you guys can probably see a little bit of human-friendly readable data. And it's not going to take much for us to know that we see that this app in focus record is recording information about WhatsApp. What we also have taking place within this record that maybe is not so easy to read is going to be additional encoded data. In fact, we actually see an encoded timestamp here within this data. It's just not super human friendly to break out. So we will need a little bit of help down the road taking a look at that information. So once we have read our data, we can move down to the payload. And just like we saw within that hex view, we're going to see multiple records located within that data payload. Now, the data payload is a little bit interesting in that it is serialized data. And like a lot of serialized data, it creates a challenge for us as examiners to try to parse out the information and understand exactly what it is that we are looking at. So when we move into looking at those individual records, like we just saw for that WhatsApp entry, we're going to see things like they have their own record header that will describe, hey, here's the size of this record payload. Here is the date and time representing the creation of the record. And I want to specifically call that out. That date and time is for the creation of the record. It does not always exactly describe the date and time of the activity that is within the records payload. So important distinction, you may see some variation there. So for example, if we look at the graphic here on the screen, I've got a record header that includes a timestamp. But when I move down into the payload information itself, I'm going to see another timestamp. And at times I may see multiple timestamps within a payload. All right, well, Charlie, that's not so bad. How can we determine what the meaning of those timestamps might be? Well, that's where things get kind of interesting when we start looking at our SEGB data, because we are not going to see a nice key value pair. So like, for example, let's look at a binary P list. Let's look at XML data. We will have a key value pair, which as a human, we appreciate. So for example, I've got a key. Animal. And I have values that are described after that. So let's say mouse, cat, dog. With these SEGB logs, we don't have the key. We don't have that animal designation to let us know what it is the data we're looking at. So for example, like in this SEGB entry, we might simply see field 2, mouse, cat, dog. And without some of the context and the actual schema and understanding, well, what is mouse, cat, dog intended to describe? Well, that's where we've got to do some research and some testing, because that documentation, that schema is just not going to be available to us. So that is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to looking at raw SEGB data. And when you are working with parsing tools in your forensic tools, they have extrapolated what that key is. Here is what mouse, cat, dog means. So they might say animals, or they might say creatures, or they might provide whatever context they built around that with their own research. Now, the other cool thing about SEGB data is just how flexible it is. So when we go into this payload area, we can add any kind of data we want. And I mean any kind of data you want. This is, again, it's binary serialized data. If you want to provide text, you can put text in there. If you want to put raw binary data, you can do that. You can put binary large objects. We see things like JPEG images are included. We see things like raw HTML is included. So you can really put anything you want in there. And we're seeing a huge variety of what it is Apple is choosing to store within this data. So this is kind of our cartoon representation of the layout of a record within SEGB, again, with its record header, payload information, and then this data payload that includes its own individual field records. Going back to a hex view and doing some interpretation on an individual entry on a SEGB file, we're going to see something that looks like this. So this is very similar to what we looked at a minute ago. This is another app in focus entry. This time around, we can see that we start off with an individual record header describing what is here. We're going to see embedded timestamps. This is describing the com.huva.event, that conference app that a lot of us have downloaded. But this just gives you a little bit more visual representation of how the data is actually being broken up and segmented within a single SEGB entry. So why does all this matter? Why do we want to spend any time talking about SEGBs and getting into this proprietary format? The primary reason is because this is one of those artifacts that is absolutely off limits to the user. They have no control over it. They can't stop it. This is baked deep, deep into iOS. In a minute or two, we're going to take a look at some data recovered from a full file system extraction. And you guys are going to see this information is coming from all over the place. Because users can't access this data, they have no way to manipulate or destroy the data. And that means if you are working on a case, you know a message or a communication event, like a phone call occurred, and you don't see it anywhere on that device, maybe you've got indications of like a missing record within a database somewhere. I would urge you to go take a look at the biomes, because there's a strong chance that if that took place recently, then you might find evidence that that actually occurred within biome data. So I love this artifact. I've been spending a lot of time on it. I've been building tools around it. But the main thing I really, really want is just to stress, I don't think we're using this artifact enough in our investigations. And it's one of those reasons that, I come on, I get to hang out with Matt and Megan today. But the big thing is I want to stress to you guys, like, this is an incredibly important and valuable artifact, and it is changing a lot. So while we are able to make use of this, and while we can get just incredible amounts of information for our investigations from it, I think we ought to do that. So to that end, I want to bring up some of this data, and we're just going to demonstrate a little bit about why this is valuable. So I'm going to go back to my app in focus directory from a moment ago. And we took a look at the fact that, hey, we can go in, we can read this data. If you want to do it manually, you can go through and read the hex. We're going to do some parsing here in a minute. But before we move over to a tool to look at this, I want to just point out some of the strong investigative value that we might have with biome data. So we took a look at the local folder a minute ago, and you can probably guess that the local folder is describing the device that was extracted. Well, gang, we have a remote folder as well. And taking a look at the remote folder, we see a series of subdirectories that include unique identifiers. What are these folders? Anybody want to take a stab at this? Not app gids, Jordan. Great, great guess. Matt came in first. Chip was second. These are my other devices. We are seeing that this information is being synced across devices. And on a few other instances, we're going to see where you will have a collection of devices available on, like a single iOS extraction. So if maybe you didn't get into the suspect's MacBook, but you did get into their iOS device, you actually can peek in and kind of take the side door to see, hey, what's been happening on that MacBook? That application that's super important for my case, or some activity within the case timeline really is important for the MacBook. Well, this actually provides an opportunity to take a look at, like, hey, what can we see kind of peeking through this hole? So again, like a super, super exciting artifact, at least for me. So much so that I've put some time into building some tooling around this. And what I want to do is I want to begin by just opening up a full iOS, full file system timeline extraction. So this tool, Sedgwick, is designed to just basically provide you with some transparency and some viewing options when it comes to these, kind of difficult SEGB files. So I have pre-processed this. The tool will go through a full file system extraction, locate all of those SEGB files. It will parse them. It builds a SQLite database for you. And then you can retrieve that parsed data from the database whenever you like. Now, hopping in here, we're going to see that we currently have 770,000 records that are active and contain data. Just giving you a brief run through of the tool. We're going to have some case information that I provided when I was starting off my processing. We're going to get a little bit of a timeline view. If you prefer to navigate through a timeline, this is one option for you to do that. You can provide timeline inputs here within this toolbar as well. But the idea behind this view is to provide a full-blown timeline of every single biome artifact that was located within a SEGB file, to make it searchable, to make it filterable, and just to make it as easy as possible to move through those 770,000 records to find the information that's going to be important for you. So one of the things that may be the most helpful for us is we a lot of times are starting off with investigative questions we want to answer, and specific categories of biome data may be the best place to start doing that. So we've already been taking a look at app in focus data. So we're just going to carry on with that for right now. Rather than populating everything within the timeline, I'm going to hit deselect here in Sedgwick. I'm going to select app in focus, and I'm going to hit apply. So we're now down to about 19,000 records, which is much more manageable. Moving through this, I see that I've got the date and the timestamp for each one of the record entries. I also have the ability to either double click, or, and this one's for you, Matt, hit the space bar to take a look at the contents of what was parsed from this individual record entry. So when we do that, we see that we have got an app in focus entry. We see the record header timestamp data. But when we move down into the payload data, we're going to see some additional information. So for example, we can see that com.apple.camera is the package name that we see associated with this entry. And then we've got another timestamp. And in this case, hey, the timestamps line up. They're dead on accurate. So that's good to go. Not always going to be the case. So we also see down here a 2.0. After a little bit of poking around and some testing, I've learned that this is going to end up being an application version number. So this is pretty much what the tool was intended to do, just to let you view and get access to the data. Now, kind of continuing on with the view options, we're looking at this right now in a table view. I can also move over to a tree view, and this just breaks everything out for us. This is probably my preferred way to work. But if you end up getting into a situation where you're really trying to build like a lot of context across multiple records. I might also just pop out some individual windows and just keep these up on the screen as I'm working. All right, let's talk a little bit now, since we are getting a little bit short on time, a little bit tight, about some of my favorite categories of biome data and some of the stuff that has been really important on recent casework for me. Now, I think pretty much everybody in here that has worked with biome data is probably already familiar with app intent. And app intent is probably the most parsed artifact we're seeing across our tools. And the reason that we're probably seeing so much interest in this is because this artifact is including things like historical communication information. And what we see right here within this record is we have got a WhatsApp sent message. Let's scroll down here just a little bit and see what we've got. This is nice because what we are seeing is just kind of the variety of data encoding that is available within SEGB. So we're seeing NS keyed archive data, which is super common for Apple to make use of. It's nice because we see things like key value pairing. But in here, we've got a hex payload, and we're not getting that broken down for us. What we're getting is just a raw view of the data information within this payload. Luckily, we are seeing an ASCII version of this parsed information slightly after that. Now, what is this actually showing us, Charlie? What are we actually looking at here? What we're seeing here is basically a GIF that I put into a WhatsApp group. So when we start going through here and we look at the intents remote image proxy, and we've got the proxy identifier information in here, this is what it looks like when you do one of those stupid, meme GIFs to a group within your WhatsApp. If I look at the same information within the tree view, we'll give it just a minute because we got to parse a bunch of data. We're going to get some additional options as far as how we might want to look at this data. So in this case, I've gone ahead and said, hey, if you see any hex within this payload, just convert it to ASCII. And while you're at it, if you see timestamps embedded here as well, decode those as well, because I don't want to have to spend time doing that type of decoding. But here we'll just see everything is already kind of broken out for us. But you guys are getting a chance to see just like how large some of these data sets are. So really, really good data here. Another kind of creepy data set that's been interesting to get into is going to be the proactive harvesting that's taking place. And when I move down to proactive harvesting, I want to select male. Proactive harvesting male. What we're going to find here is the little guy on my shoulder has been reading the contents of my mailboxes, my email boxes. And this includes both the native mail app and third-party mail applications like Outlook. So I see, all right, Charlie, final weeks to register for the 37th ACFE Global Fraud Conference for Field 11. You guys can probably take a stab at what that likely is relative to an email, right? That's probably going to be the subject line. Moving down a little bit further, though, I see Field 14 has got this document type HTML. And if you guys have done any HTML work, you might see that all of the following data looks really, really familiar. What we've got here is just raw HTML data that makes up this email. So when I click on this, I can also select, hey, just interpret this as HTML, treat it like a web page. We can move through there and we can see the way this would have appeared within the mailbox. So again, pretty interesting artifact. We're seeing proactive harvestings taking place with messages, different third-party apps, Safari browsing. Again, creepy stuff, right? This is some really, really, not necessarily intrusive, but this is sensitive information for users. Moving down to the bottom, I do want to point out user notification events. This is another SEGB that has been really, really helpful on some casework. where oftentimes users will allow a portion of the communication content to be visible on screen in a notification. This is capturing that. And I think for the purposes of time, I'm going to maybe move past just kind of the viewer component of the tool and move into a little bit of the parsed data that is available. So I like digging into bits and bytes as much as the next person, but we all have a backlog and we all have, deadlines. We're trying to get things done. So the tool also includes some basic parsing for data that is available within the SEGB files. In this case, we see like location information, latitude, longitude. We're going to see things like associated street addresses. So there's like just a real wealth of information, again, because we are able to pull from things like, raw location data on our devices. You'll see contact list, visited URLs, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth hotspots, again, those notifications, messages, keyboards. Y'all remember like the user keyboard dictionary? Well, that is also being kept here within the Biome information. App installations to maybe help out. You're working that case and the suspect is deleting applications off their phone while you're knocking on the front door. So again, like just an absolute wealth of information available here, up to and including things like embedded JPEG images. We have seen some ICAC, some child exploitation related casework where this has been a really big deal. So that is going to be some of the parsed SEGB data. And like we talked about earlier, I've been absolutely wearing out the new database records we're seeing in the most recent iOS activity. And these are also parsing out information from those databases. So cool stuff like Find My Devices, flight data, travel records, financial transactions, all kinds of creepy stuff that has just been really super interesting to get into. So with that, I think my time is probably about up. Matt, do you want to kick things off with some questions?
Yeah, I have one question that comes to mind, and maybe you covered this during the PowerPoint, and maybe I wasn't paying enough close attention. But from the from the device point of view and from Apple's point of view, like what are they actually doing with this data? Like, why did they create these biomes? Like, how is it actually? I assume there's some user-related feature set or something that they're trying to do to help the user with the phone in some way. But how does this data actually propagate to the use of the phone as a user?
One of the coolest things about Apple right now, like everybody's talking about how they're like behind the curve on the AI race and everything. They've really kind of been focusing more on local models. And it seems as though this is being leveraged heavily by Apple Intelligence and those localized models. It is also being used, and you're going to see some things like sync folders that indicate not only some potential cross-device syncing, but I mean, there even could be data being synced directly to iCloud. And we don't know, right?
Yeah.
But the available documentation, where Apple, who is probably the best person to ask, they say that this is being used for Apple Intelligence services.
Okay. So it's basically they're aggregating data. They're taking data from what the user is doing and trying to aggregate it basically into a database that they can use for user analytics or user intelligence type stuff. So they can pretty much branch out and build any feature they want around this. It's just like seems like they know like, hey, if we're going to build these more intelligent services in the future, we need to start aggregating this data in an easy to access format so that we could build feature sets around it, as opposed to like, having this data either just all over the place in the phone or maybe some of it not even documented or recorded, then it's like lost forever and they can't do anything with it. So yeah, this is what I like about this is that, something I always say in forensics is that the reason that we're even capable of doing our jobs as forensic examiners on like Windows and Mac OS is simply because we are taking advantage of the engineering principles that these companies use to try to make user-related features. And in order to do that, they have to save some of this context on the disk because they want to be able to use it for themselves to make features around it to make the user experience better. And we're just like taking advantage of that. So I always think back to like link files and jump lists and things like that, where those are a heavily used, Windows forensic artifact. But the only reason it exists is because Windows is, Microsoft's making a feature where, well, we want to make it easy for the user to jump back into files they've recently accessed, right? So we're going to create this little artifact that tracks every time a user opens or accesses a file so that we can show them a little pop-up and they can see all the files they've recently accessed. And then we just use that to our own advantage to say, well, we use the same context, but we just use it for an investigative purpose. For now, we know these are recent files the person has accessed and when they potentially access them.
Yeah. It's like phone
The
records. I mean, they're
right,
keeping a transaction, an event log for billing and, their own record
right,
keeping and maintenance purposes, but we use them for a totally different purpose.
yeah. Another thought I had too, just because I've done, I'm just thinking through investigations I've done in the past before Biome and thinking about how this would have been useful to me. But have you seen any like airdrop related activity in Biomes, like showing like file transfer stuff or anything like that?
So I've not had a chance to look for it. You're not going to see like a specific call out for airdrop, I don't believe.
Hmm.
So that would be probably down here with the device data. I've never seen like a specific airdrop one, but it's something I'm definitely into looking for.
Yeah,
What we might see instead of airdrop exclusively would be something like a Siri assist type artifact
yeah.
where, hey, you selected to share and then you chose airdrop and then Siri's keeping up with, well, here's the device they airdropped it with. I can
Mhm.
take a look though.
No,
Um,
I'm just curious because I know that's something that, um, years ago I had a couple of cases related to airdrop or trying to figure out, okay, did somebody, because you remember back in the day with airdrop, you could bomb an entire group of people with an illicit airdrop file, right? Um, and I had investigations in the past where that happened, and we were trying to pinpoint, okay, which person did this? Where did the airdrop come from? And it was digging into the sort of unified log data, and it was usually pretty volatile logging, so it wasn't clear if you knew the airdrop was being logged somewhere, but you weren't sure how long it was going to stick around to actually do the investigation. And something like this just feels like would be prime real estate for potential airdrop forensic traces, if it's being logged. Um,
Kind of the
but
interesting
yeah,
thing, Matt, is like we're seeing these categories change release to release.
yeah.
Like it's
So they're
it's
just
constantly moving. And that's where the
yeah,
approach for this tool is a viewer first. Because
yeah,
if it's just purely a SEGB parser, like you're gonna never stop chasing the dragon. You got multiple,
right,
release versions you got to deal with. But
right.
now one thing I did
Uh,
notice in the chat, uh, unfortunately, everybody, I am using this as a commercial tool. It is a paid for tool, but I'm not here to sell it. Mostly just trying to use it as a teaching tool today. If you are interested in learning any more about biome stuff, I've got a website, northloopconsulting.com, where I've been pushing out blog posts for, I don't know, I guess the last year or so. And you can just pick up some of the latest, greatest stuff I've been looking for on the website.
um, I know there are a couple of questions. I'm going to try to wrap up my piece so we can answer any Q&A from the audience. But I have like two more questions. One, are there any when you're doing your biome research, have there been any have you seen any lack of artifacts that surprised you where you went hunting through biome data and you're like, there's got to be something in here related to XYZ thing and you just haven't seen it yet? Is there anything like that that you've noticed just like, wow, it's not, you're surprised it's not logging or tracking some specific activity or artifact? I know that's
No.
kind of a very open-ended question, but I'm
Yeah,
curious if you've run into that.
that's a no. Because a
Yeah.
lot of the things I'm usually looking for in here are going to be data that I believe to have been on the device that would have been accessible from the call history
Hmm.
or location information or communication events. That's where I spend a lot of time going through there. And I see call histories and I see messages and I see message content. Uh, where I really get surprised is just on the other side, how much other stuff is there. The things where we were having to go into like unified logs to get like button presses, we don't need to go there anymore. This is much more accessible and much easier to access. Yeah.
Yeah. And last question is, have you had any real cases just in your professional career where you've actually used this stuff as evidence? And has it gotten to like a court level where you've had to testify or seen anybody testify about it and see what kind of questions or cross-examination they've received on this biome data? Or do you know of any cases where that's happened? Maybe not for you, but anyone else that's presented it and actually walked into a court jurisdiction with this as evidence?
Yes, we're definitely using this for evidence.
Yeah.
With most of this being fairly new, and like the newest biome data is the best biome data, volume and accuracy wise. It has not made its court yet, but we are seeing this used on a variety of different cases. My day job is in law enforcement, so we're usually going after, the ICAC related stuff, communication events, location data, that kind of thing. I've been really surprised where like my friends in the private sector have been wearing this stuff out because, you think about like crash investigations and an artifact like app in focus. What
Yeah.
was an app being actively open and accessible on an unlocked device in a car at a
Yeah.
particular point in time? It's just, and I hate to say this too, sorry, all the cops in the room, but my buddies on the defense side want to see how the phone was handled in between seizure and extraction. And this isn't again, it's another very granular
Yeah.
look at what happened after seizure.
No, that's an excellent point. And that's not just for law enforcement, it's for private sector too. So when
Yeah.
you're handling, it's a good thing to understand that when you're handling these devices during collection, to be aware that a lot of the things that you're doing between the time you collect it from the custodian or the suspect and the time you collect it, that's all potentially being documented in the biome that can be reviewed later on to see what you were doing. So it's just another, so, that's just telling you, okay, just be super careful about what you're doing and how you're handling the phone and how you're handling apps on the phone and things like that, because it could be reviewed later.
Just follow best
Cool.
practices and it'll
Yeah.
record best practices. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. So I guess, do we have any, Megan, do you see any Q&A? It looks like somebody raised their hand. Looks like Sarah raised her hand. Does she have
Yeah.
a question she wants to ask? Okay.
Yes, and then we have a lot of other questions in the chat as well. So Sarah, we're going to start with you because you have your hand raised. So I'm going to give you permission to talk, and then it should give you microphone controls, and you can ask your question.
And you might be muted, Sarah, so you might have to unmute yourself. She said that was an accident. Oh, she said it was an accident. False alarm.
Never mind.
You can still talk if you want. You can still say something if you want.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that, Sarah. Let me disable that for you. Okay. So we do have a lot of questions in the chat. Most of these are related to the tool itself. First question from Steven. Do you need to unzip the extraction to parse with the tool?
You do not. And again, that's one of those things where it's nice making a tool when you're having to do the work. So no, you can just feed it that zip file generated by your advanced extraction tool. It will go in, locate the correct data, and just unzip that. So you're not having to like unzip 500 gigs of data to process.
All right, cool. Next question is from Sherry. How does ingestion of the full file system work?
Yeah. Not really intended to be a tool demo, but all you've got to do is say you want to create a timeline, click on timeline creation. You're going to get the ability to provide some basic case information, describe your device if you like, tell it where you want your database to be stored. And then you're either going to ingest a folder that has the data you want, or you can just ingest that zip file that your extraction tool probably created. And then you hit start processing and it does its own thing. And then you get that resulting timeline view we saw a few minutes ago.
All right, cool. Another quick question on the tool. Is there a command line version?
There's not, but there's no reason there couldn't be. The thing I would say is the tool's probably most value because of how it chooses to show you things. So you could definitely parse and do the command line stuff and get a resulting database or some kind of like massive CSV file. Uh, but at that point, I think you probably wasted the part of the tool that's useful. It would be my 2 cents on that. But if that's something you're interested in, let me know. I'm sure you've got a specific application in mind on how you'd want to do that, but it's totally doable.
All right, cool. The next question from Philip. Since Biome aggregates behavioral data from multiple system services, how do investigators validate the accuracy and provenance of Biome artifacts in court when the data may be derived rather than directly generated by a user's interaction?
Yeah, great question. Uh, I told you guys earlier we need more research on this. One of the good things about this is that because the little guy is sitting there on our shoulder, he's not generating data. It's being collected from elsewhere on the device. So, for example, if I was trying to validate the behavior for, let's say, like a communication event, and I see that the biome has records related to a deleted event and undeleted events, I can go back to that original database and start lining things up. Is everything here correct? Is the content of the message correct for the undeleted data? Do the timestamps match? And then we can say reasonably, well, the only difference between the deleted and the undeleted data was the deletion process. So in that case, it looks like the biome data is going to be accurate and it is simply persisted as a copy of that original data.
All right, cool. We just got a couple more questions here. Are there any known scenarios where Biome retains evidence of user activity after the original application artifacts have been deleted?
Yes. Messages, call logs, uh, basically anything we see in Biome is untouchable by the user. So anything that is being recorded by a Biome, but that a user can delete elsewhere on the phone, the Biome data will persist because again, it's just a log. So if we see, like that email from the Certified Fraud Examiners Association, if I chose to delete that, it's no longer accessible from the device. That data is still within that log.
Okay, I think we've got time for these last two questions. So thanks everybody for your patience as we have been getting through these. One more question related to the tool. Will the tool parse all the data from the full file system extraction, or is it just used for the biome data?
Exclusively for biome data, only for biome data.
Awesome. And somebody was curious why the tool had the option to hide Tombstone, and we're wondering what data the Tombstone contains.
Yeah. All right. Super interesting question. They're not unique to SEGB data, but essentially what's happening is we are seeing logs persist where we still have logical records that exist within old files, but there is no longer logically stored data within them. So again, I don't want to hide anything from the examiner. You are going to be able to see deleted entries. You're going to be able to see deleted records within Tombstone data. It's just that if I'm trying to find artifacts of investigative value, I usually want those somewhere else. I want to remove that from my screen. But again, I'm not going to hide the ball. I'm not going to act like there are no tombstones. You need to know what's there.
All right, cool. We're about at the top of the hour, so I think that's all the time we have for questions. Charlie, is it okay to have people like reach out to you through your website if they
Yeah,
have further
absolutely.
questions? Let me drop the website in the chat. One moment. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
And if you guys think of any fun research projects for biome stuff, I'm all about it.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. That was so informative.
Yeah,
I
thanks for
had
having
no
me.
idea that iOS was tracking quite as much as it was. Um, so thank you everybody for attending today. Really appreciate it. Thank you again, Charlie, for being our guest presenter today. Really appreciate that as well. And we'll hope to see you guys in a couple of weeks at the next Workshop Wednesday. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.